So good luck.
Thank you. So hello everyone, and thank you for joining me for this session about fantastic cloud shadow admins and where to find them. I'm Asaf Hecht, the team leader of one of the security research team in CyberArk Labs. In my research work, I focus on red side techniques of how to exploit and break popular platforms and security concepts. In the past, I presented in several security conferences, wrote and published a few open source tools. On one of them, we are going to discuss a bit more in a couple of minutes, and I also got some allowed patents. And I'm super excited toward the session today. We're going to talk about my latest research about shadow admin in Azure. But don't afraid, we're also going to mention AWS as well. So it's time to start, and I think the best way will be to open with an opening demo. So let's see how attackers can compromise an Azure shadow admins, then escalate their privileges and take over the entire Azure environment. Let's see it. So you can see here, this is the attacker's machine. He got a credential for Azure. It could be via phishing, right? It could be via an exploit or some other techniques. The next thing the attacker do is to connect to Azure console, which is the compromised Azure credential he got, to check what this user can do, right? You can see it logged on. So first of all, the credentials are valid, right? The next thing, he wants to perform the goal. The attackers in our scenario is very bad. He wants to delete all the important virtual machines of the target organization. So you can see it marks all the virtual machines and put the delete and try to delete them all. You can see 4 errors for the 4 virtual machines because this compromised credential doesn't have the permission to delete virtual machines. But our attacker is a bit smarter than this, and he has an escalation script that is prepared in advance. You can see run the script with the same compromised Azure credential of the storage team leader. And that's it, the script finished. You can see it will do a refresh on the same Azure page. You can see now there are more virtual machine, right? So obviously he has more permission right now. But what about the deletion permission? So we try to delete again all the virtual machines. Oh, well, no error message here. And you can see the virtual machines are being removed one after the other. Well, that is devastating, right? Of course, he could do whatever he wants in this scenario. We will see what happened under the wood in a few minutes. He could also run Bitcoin, right? He could steal and access sensitive customer information and so on. Now, after we saw an example for shadow admins threat, we can get into the details of them. The 3 objectives from today's session are to understand Azure better from the aspect of identity access management and the permission architecture in Azure. The second is to learn the new threat of Azure shadow admins and get recommendation and a free open source tool for mitigating these risks. Shadow admins are hidden in every environment and platform, and our job is to discover and eliminate them. 3 years ago, we target the area of on-premises Active Directory. Then a year after, we published at RSA conference our research on shadow admins in AWS cloud. And today, we continue in the cloud world and targeting Azure. But we will also share, of course, our previous findings from AWS. I can also say that in the future, we also have thoughts on Google Cloud Platform because Again, it's a very popular platform. So let's start and put Azure on the fire. What are shadow admins like? And let's see a magnificent example from the world of Harry Potter. Yeah, I hope there are some Harry Potter fans over there. But if you haven't recognized it yet, it's the famous Polyjuice potion. With this potion, any wizard or witch can change their physical look and impersonating their target wizard. All they need is a piece of the target body, such as a fin hair. Harry and his friends, well, also his enemies, right, use this Polyjuice potion throughout all the years of the story. It was used to impersonate Professor Moody, to break into Grindelwald's bank, and to hide Harry Potter with the addition of 6 more identical figures of him. In the aspect of shadow admins, all the ones who can create this potion and use it are shadow admins because they can impersonate different identities and then perform action on their behalf. In our cyber world, the attackers could compromise a shadow admins like this, and with it to escalate their privileges by impersonating another user with more privileges. This is a privilege escalation. In the end, they will get the permission they need for executing their malicious actions. We need to discover the ones who can create and use such a Polyjuice potion and be sure they are well secured. So shadow admins are a new layer of privileged user. In the first look, those shadow admins look innocent and have limited amount of permission. However, in fact, they do have the equivalent amount of power just like any other regular full admin. That's because they have specific permission to control and impersonate other privileged users. Moreover, those permissions hide in a mass amount of permissions, and that's the reason that shadow admins are so stealthy. So it's time to go back to the start and then drill into the Azure details. What are permissions in Azure? Permissions are built from 3 main elements. The entity that could use the permission, right? The action that is being permitted by the permission, and the target resource where the permitted action can be performed upon. In Azure, we have multiple types of resources. It could be virtual machines, database instances, serverless function, and obviously a lot more. In Azure terms, all those resources are grouped together under a scope that is called Azure subscription. Subscription is the basic and important term that we should remember. In the same time, the identities in Azure are being managed and defined in the Azure Active Directory. The Azure AD is the identity source of the environment. The subscription includes the resources, and the Azure AD include the identities. An organization can have a few different Azure subscriptions under the same roof of its Azure account. A good reason to do this is for giving a different subscription to each department and purpose in the enterprise. One subscription could be for R&D, for developing and testing. Another could be for a production environment, and so on. This segmentation gives better control over the Azure resources throughout the company. The identities, again, for all of the subscription are being still managed and defined in the Azure Active Directory. The Azure Active Directory is the place where you create and manage users, groups, and applications. These are the automated identities in Azure, right? The permission over the Azure Active Directory are divided to different built-in administrators roles. Each administrator roles is a different kind of permission, and they should be assigned to the relevant users who needs those kind of permission as part of their job position. You can see here the list of the directory administrators roles. Example are global administrator, compliance administrator, security administrator, license administrator, and a few more. Regarding the permission over the subscription, it's a separate word of permission. There are two options to become a subscription admin, to have a permission over the Azure resources. The first is being defined as a classic administrator, and the second is to be assigned with admin permission by using the subscription RBAC, role-based access control mechanism. Here's the subscriptions access control menu with the available RBAC roles. You can see here the example, for the classic administrators. Here are the RBAC example. You can see there are a few types. You can be an owner, to have it all, contributor, reader, backup. You can see a few options for backup and so on. So you should decide what exactly the user should have and assign it the right role. To sum up so far, Azure Permission Architecture is built from two layers, the directory layers and the subscription layer. The identities are being part of the directory layers and the resources are part of the subscription layer. Each layer has its own permission definitions and admins. The permission assignment is totally separated. It could be that a user is a directory admin, and at the same time, it doesn't have any permission on the subscriptions. And of course, at vice versa and the opposite direction as well. There could be a user or an application that is has full permission admin over a specific subscription, but cannot do anything in the Azure AD level. For example, it cannot create user, change password, and so on. So the two layers have a separated permission assignment. Now let's go and discuss our main goal. Who are the most privileged users in Azure? Who are the most important identities that attackers will so glad to put their hands on, right? And I invite you now for a moment to ask yourself this question and answer it. So think also how to discover them. So first of all, we will start in the above layer of the directory layer in the Azure Active Directory. You can see that when I'm creating a new user to Azure, I can choose and assign it a directory role. The user could be a regular user, global administrator, or one of the listed so-called limited administrator roles. These are the three options. This is exactly the point. We will show you that some of the limited admins are not so limited and can escalate their privileges and gain more permission than they initially had. So the first directory admin, it's very obvious, are the users who are global administrators. These are this is the straightforward full admin of Azure. And the user who has this role have all the permission over the entire environment. By the way, there are about 35 directory roles. However, there are also shadow admins over there. Users that at first look seem to be limited, but they aren't. We divided the shadow types to 4 main categories. You can see here. And let's talk about the first category, that is permissions. There is a role that's called privileged role administrator. Believe it or not, it's part of the so-called limited directory admins. By having this role, you can control the role assignments of others and also the role you have. Therefore, we can all agree that a user with this role has the equivalent power of a global administrator. In a second, a potential attacker who might compromise this user could escalate itself to a full directory admin, right? But again, there could be more complex scenarios like applications. Azure can run many applications, and it's important to know that applications in Azure have permissions. You can see here the application menu for the Azure console. And here, example, when you run application, you approve a set of permission. It again depends on the application and what the permission it was defined with. You can see it could be very sensitive, like read and write domains, read and write devices, and so on. And you can be sure that every organization have sensitive application. I can also call it privileged application in their Azure. Example could be a backup application, right? So a backup application would have read permission over the environment, over virtual machines, databases, and files, sensitive customers' information, and so on. What about user management app? When a user left the company, there might be a script or automation tool that's also removed and disabled its user in Azure, right? So this automation tool, this automation script or application would have the sensitive permission of disabling permission users, deleting users, maybe reset password of these users, and so on. Also, DevOps and performance tools can run, stop, and delete virtual machines and other important resources in our environment. And here are the two, again, not global administrator that could be, if they are compromised, might devastate our environment. It's the first application administrator and cloud application administrator. Both of these roles are very privileged because the ones who get them can control and impersonate any application identity in the environment and further gain more sensitive permissions. Now, another admin role is help desk admin. Well, this is a classic shadow admin. Of course, if someone can reset the password of a different user, it's a huge risk of privilege escalation. And also the role of user administrator, the ability to change memberships of groups. It's a very dangerous one because most of us will have already an existed group of admin, and if a user application with change membership permission is compromised, the attacker could add itself to this already existed admin group. So you can see here two another limited admin roles to the list of most privileged users in Azure. And you can see the summary list of the most privileged directory admins. All of them should be secured. They are the Azure Tier 0 admins users. Now let's continue and talk about the next layer, right? The subscription layer. First of all the classic administrators are full admin. They exist because Azure was built with them before the subscription RBAC mechanism was available. So now you should less use it, but it's still right there for also backward compatibility, right? But all the three classic administrators are full admin in the subscription level. And from the RBAC roles, there are three straightforward admins. There is the owner role. It has the full permissions. There is the contributor. Contributor has the full permission. The only thing he doesn't have is changing others' permissions. And there is, you can see the sixth here, a user access administrator. This role is dangerous because it doesn't have any permission, but the permission to change permission of others, right? So of course, it has a great place in our list. This is from about 120 built-in subscription roles that Azure has. But also here there are a bit more complexity. First, group owners. In Azure, every group application can have an owner. The users who own privileged group or application are shadow admins. Because, for example, the owner of an admins group is an admin by itself, no matter if it is currently member of this admin group or not, because it could in any moment add itself to this group and be a full admin as well. The same goes with application owner. Now, if you didn't impress so far, there is a whole new place for the creation of shadow admins under the custom RBAC permissions. In the subscription RBAC mechanism, you can create a custom role. And this is a place that is there are so many permissions that is very hard to know what is the risk in each permission you assigned a different user or application. So how it looks, role assignment in RBAC. It looks like this. It's built from three elements. The first is the service principal, the identity. It could be user group, service principal, or manage identity. The second is the role definition part. It's the list of actions that are going to be permitted in the permission assignment. It reminds the one who more familiar with AWS, a permission policy in AWS. So in Azure, they call it role definitions. You can see the actions that are being permitted or not permitted. In this example, you can see the contributor. It has all the permissions, but not the authorization permission. You cannot change permissions of others. And the third part is the resources. Again, it's an important part, and it's defined on what the actions could be allowed to perform on. So what is the problem here? And the problem is that you need to be precise in all the three aspects: the identity, the permissions, and the target scope. And it's quite hard to do it properly without breaking the least privilege principle and with no misconfiguration issue. One of the main reasons for this complexity is that Azure and also AWS have more than 5,000 different permissions that could be used and assigned. And I will also say here that we saw this kind of misconfiguration and bad permission assignment in real organization that we took a look, and there were also some real attack stories published in the past. So from 5,000 different Azure permission, in our research we tried to list and discovered the permissions that are so sensitive that could be lead to a full escalation to a full Azure admin. And you can see here the list. You can see they are around the Microsoft Authorization Service. It could be a permission to add a new classic administrator, and the permission to grant permission, to elevate admin access, and so on. Now, let's go back and understand the opening demo from the start of this presentation. What you can see here is the permissions of the storage team leader, the user that was compromised, and the attacker put his hands over it. So you can see here the sensitive permission to modify role assignment. So again, in a first look, it will look like an innocent one. It only have 5 permissions line that are being allowed. But the 5th line, this is a shadow admin's permission. It gives this storage team leader the ability to assign and modify the permission of itself and of others. And why it's of others as well? Because you can see in the assignable scope, it's mentioned the whole subscription. So the combination of these two is so risky that this storage team leader could escalate and be a full Azure admin in a second. We saw it in the demo. And this is how the permission of this storage team leader should have looked like, with a specific and restricted list of the target scopes. Again, in contrast to the original permitted scope of the entire subscription. So this is a nice example to the complexity. You can see that if there was a good assignment of the scope, the storage team leader could not change permission of users. By the way, in this organization, they wanted to give the storage team leader the permission to change permission. It was part of their business need, because they decided, and we will all agree about it, that the storage team leader should be the one that be able to give the new member, for example, if there is a new member in his team, the team leader should be the one to give the right permission to this team member. And if the team member is leaving, the storage team leader should be the one to revoke its permissions. Moreover, if a new database is being created, the storage team leader should be the one to manage the permission of this newly created database. So this is the reason they put the Microsoft Authorization role assignment permission. But again, with the combination of the resource of the whole subscription, you can see here the creation of a shadow admin. This storage team leader is a full admin, and there are many more examples like this, and we saw it in many real organization scans that we performed in the past. You can see here the summary of the privileged users, including the shadow admins. From the left, the Active Directory layer, and from the right, the subscription layer. So what about AWS, right? So AWS also have a very sensitive permission, and it's very complex and hard thing to do to assign the exact needed permission to the one who need it. And we also there we published it about 2 years ago. You can see also a blog post about it. There are 4 types of permission that could be very risky and lead to a full privilege escalation in AWS. Let's see one example. This is a user with the permission to change policy versions. In AWS, there are policy version up to 5 versions that one of them is applied. Let's see what does it mean in a short demo. So this is the AWS console. You can see a user. The policy is very limited. It only has list users permission, right? But if I go to policy versions, you can see there are 5 versions over here. And currently the default is defined as the 5. This is the one that's applied. But the version 4 is an admin. You can see the asterisk, all the action on all the resources. And if I mark version 4 and set it as a default, now I took the same user with the read permissions and made it a full admin. You can see I refresh the policy and see I have all the actions in all the services in the environment. And from the attacker side, from the command line, it looks like this. It will need only two actions. The first one is to create policy versions. He will mention the target policy name and the new policy version he want to add. And when he wants to change the default policy, it will need another API calls and just change this to the new version. And also, when he finish his malicious action, he could flip it back, right? He could convert again the default policy version, so the user he compromised look innocent. So here you go, just in time admin that the attacker can use and perform his malicious action with. And here is a nice kind of a table with 10 different kind of sensitive permission we should all took care of and make sure all the entities with those permission are being first of all discovered and second of all well secured. So what we can do about all of this and about detection and mitigation. And 2 years ago, again, we at CyberArk Lab published an open source tool called SkyArk. SkyArk could help you identify your most privileged user in the cloud. We started with AWS Self. It's the first scanning module of SkyArk. It's for scanning AWS cloud environment and discover the most privileged entities there. And today I'm happy to talk and focus on Azure Stealth Scan. This is the module of SkyArk for scanning Azure environment. Azure Stealth scans the Azure entities. It needs read-only permission only because it doesn't modify anything. It just query the environment and the permission and perform locally the analysis. Of course, it's an open source tool, so you can already have a look over SkyArk at GitHub. And in the results of the scan, it will discover the privileged user the straightforward one that we talked about, and also the shadow admins. Let's see a demo. Wait. Okay, so this is the Skyarc GitHub page. It has all the details and explanation you will need, a quick start guide, and also references to blog posts that we wrote about the threat of shadow admins. So all you need to do is to download the tool, go to the folder. It's a PowerShell script, import the module, and start the scan with the command scan Azure admins. It will ask you for credential. Again, it could be read-only credential. By the way, you can, if you have Azure in your organization, you can also scan and use the environment with your regular Azure and domain users, because by default, Office 365 user has a read permission over the directory. That's it. It will pop you with the results. You can see the discovered Azure admins. And also, it discovered the storage team leader as a shadow admin. So it's an important insight. It includes admins from RBC, it includes classic administrators, and of course, the admins in the directory level. And in a folder, it will also provide you the CSV results that you can take a look and further examine it. I also can recommend on something nice that I saw in an organization. They did an automated scan for this Skyarc. So every day or every week, the scans start automatically. And then there is an automated process that compare the CSV files. And if there is a new line, a new identity that's been identified as an admin, it sends them an alert so they could start to look at it and to see what the reason and what this admin is. Because again, it's very it's the one of the scenario that the attackers will do is to add admins of themselves to the environment and add shadow admins as a persistent and a stealthy persistent method to stay put in the environment. Of course, also part of the mitigation of this shadow admins is the cloud security, the fundamental tips, right? We should make sure to secure our cloud platform and the privileged access to it by restricting complex password and hiding them from the employees, by removing hard-coded cloud credentials from script and the automations, tools, and so on, by having full audit, monitoring, and recording of all the Azure session. Enabling multi-factor is an important one as well. And a free actionable takeaway from this session is regarding Skyarc and shadow admins. So I will really advise everyone to scan their environment with Skyarc, and it's free and it's read-only credential only. Then remove the unnecessary admin. Identify you will get the list of admin, right? So first of all, identify them that they are not already part of an existing attack. Identify that all of the admin should be there. Then ask yourself if they really need this kind of privilege layer, or maybe there are permission policy and role definition modification that you could perform and restrict this identity from being shadow admins. For example, the storage team leader will be identified with our scan, and we could constrain and fix his permission policy. And then, of course, secure the cloud admin that are there, because, of course, in every environment, there will be still some admins that are being needed, but make sure they are well secured. And remember, discover your admin before the bad guys will, because it's out there and they are search for it, and attackers are learn this stuff, and they could use this complexity of the permission to hide themselves and live for a long period of time. So it's also good to remember. And that's it for today. Thank you very much. You are welcome to follow Cyber Clubs for future updates. Of course, I'm available if you have any specific requests, and future updates will be through our Twitter. You can see Echtov. And that's it. If you have any additional question, you will see how I can answer it now. And again, if not, I will answer it later on. So again, thank you for your time. It was a pleasure from my side.
Are you in the Discord? And
yes,
okay.
but I didn't see. Yeah, I didn't see the channel of the Q&A. I will search again.
Yeah, it's I think the 7th or 8th in ACFest 2020. It's called TalkConf Q&A. If you don't have access to it, ask in the help desk. They will add you to it. So, and then just go there and just tell you who you are, so people know your ID, so they can talk directly to you. Because sometimes they ask questions for different speakers, so they know which speaker to ask.
Yeah, perfect. So again, currently I don't see it. I will send a message to the help desk, and they will connect me to this, and I will see the question there and I will answer. And my user is Asaf Hecht, and I will take a look of the question too.
For now, we don't have questions directly, but you have a lot of thank you. Thank you very much for that talk.
Thank you again. It was a pleasure, and we really recommend you all to scan your admins and also the stealthy shadow admins and protect them. This is important things to do.